Well, hello there. So I'm currently in Korea enjoying my recharge, and recently there has been a bunch of talk about AI self-improving and just a lot of kind of news around how AI is essentially replacing people's jobs. And looking around in Korea, there's just so many young people and like busy people just running around. And it got me kind of thinking about myself. Back when I graduated in like 2010 or something, it was right after the housing crisis. So I remember finding jobs were extremely difficult. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that the current market or anything like that is anything related to that. I don't know actually what was worse. I guess technically when I graduated, it was officially a recession. But to be honest, the current like data, all of the data that we see, a lot of like the unemployment numbers and stuff seems a little misleading for some reason. Like this time feels very different. Like this time, because of AI and what it could mean, it just feels different than any other recessions or downturns. Like it almost feels existential. And I think a lot of comments that I get, a lot of people that reach out, especially young people in their 20s and 30s, they have a lot of concerns. You know, what should I study? What should I do? So in this video, I thought I would give 50 or so tips at a high level on what I would do if I was in my 20s again or early 30s and I didn't already have like a major career that I could like lean off of, right? Because the numbers clearly show that the jobs that are getting automated right now, it's more focused to tasks that like junior engineers or junior like tech workers would do. And you know, as Cloud Code, Codex, and these like agentic tools gets better and better, I think a lot of CEOs and a lot of just like people who are not actually doing the work will go in and be a little bit too aggressive and like replacing a bunch of people that they still need. But at some point, there may be some reality that a lot of the jobs that we used to do or we needed people to do, AI may take over those jobs. So this is not a doom and gloom video. This is more about how can we adapt and kind of put our best foot forward. This is more about like high level thoughts that I have on what I would do if I was in my like early 20s or 30s and I was just starting out again, because I actually switched my career at 28 to software engineering. So I was right. So this is really just advice that I would give to myself back in the day. I'm going to be teleporting a bunch of places as I'm making this while I'm kind of exploring Korea. So I hope you guys enjoy some of the scenery and also some of the tips. All right, so the first tip to level set is that your feed is not exactly the marketplace. The thing about your feed and like news in general is that negative sentiment always sells. There's a lot of study that says negative posts, rage baiting essentially gets a lot more attraction. So all of the doom and gloom about people losing their jobs and like doing 100 posts, 100 applications and not getting anything, I think there is definitely validity to that, but essentially all of those posts are people who are still looking, who are still angry, and who are still kind of deep in that trenches. So one thing you should really think about is instead of just relying on doom scrolling, you should really do some deep dives onto kind of what the actual data is around unemployment and what kind of jobs are like not being posted, what kind of companies are hiring and not hiring. I think like doing your own analysis and deep dives, and rather than just letting something spoon fed to you, I think that is like a first step. So your feed is definitely not the actual marketplace. So don't get distracted by that. All right, so the next tip is around never asking a barber for a haircut. Now, what this basically means is that all of the AI companies essentially has a reason to hype up the progress, whether that is AGI or AI that like self-iterates, or Cloud Code that just builds all the features, I don't code anymore, all these kind of things. There's probably a lot of truth to these statements, but at the same time, all of these companies have major incentive to make sure that essentially the gravy train continues to go. So making sure that people are kind of bought into it, people are invested to it, people somewhat has a fear of missing out. Now, with that said, I don't think this is all hype. I genuinely believe right now that learning agentic coding tools like Cloud Code or Codex is probably the best thing you can do for your career. And AI is definitely here to stay. But at the same time, you should always take some of these like predictions and all this kind of hype around AI in with a grain of salt, and really do your own research and get your own feel of how these tools are evolving. Now, the next tip is that demos lies and productions tells the truth. So if you're worried that essentially AI is taking over everything right now, there has been real studies by MIT that said 95% of AI adoption from major like Fortune 500 companies has so far failed, and they have not seen like real meaningful progress. Now, the study is a little old. It's before the November kind of Opus 4.5 release. So probably a lot of these things have changed by now. But when I look at the landscape overall, and I do a bunch of training on Claude Code and Codex and these kind of AI tooling, I would say that most people are still not very sure on how to leverage these tools to their best abilities. And I think it's only like a few handful of companies, like some startups, obviously OpenAI and Anthropic, they're bleeding edge and leading into these kind of AI adoptions. And even then, a lot of their features are still in just like preview mode. Like Claude Code Design is in preview mode. It's a really fantastic tool, but it's still not, they still haven't figured out all the kinks yet. So my point is that don't be afraid of all of the large demos and like a bunch of people posting stuff into their feed that it's just demos, and like, a lot of PMs and grifters are just like making a bunch of posts about nothing, saying that they built something in one shot. Like those are just demos. You should really look for things that have lasted and that has been in production for a while and is like have wide usage. Like Codex and Claude Code are great examples of AI tooling that has survived. In my opinion, all the other AI tooling and all that little stuff, they're just demos still. They're not quite there yet. Even if their valuation's like crazy, we don't know if they're going to survive. So don't buy into the hype. Forget about the demos and just look out for things that are really making a difference in production. All right. So the next tip is not judging your insides with someone else's outsides. This is a typical like Instagram reel highlight stuff, but basically everyone on LinkedIn or Threads or X, they're all posting about kind of the shiny things, and they're making a ton of progress. Everyone in their mom has a new skill, new Claude Code skill that is changing their world and changing everything. So but the reality is they're probably spending a ton of time iterating with Claude Code, prompting, updating the systems, and these skills probably don't work 100% of the time. They're flaky. So don't really compare yourself to any of them. Like some GitHub projects that just gets tons of stars all of a sudden. There's an interesting take where GitHub stars don't necessarily equal to like excellent engineering anymore, in my opinion. It's just around marketing now. GitHub has turned into marketing, and whoever can get the most stars the fastest because of some hype cycle are now the best engineers, I guess. But I don't believe in all of that. Just focus on yourself, focus on getting better, and don't compare yourself to others. I found this little cool mural over here. Yeah, I thought it was kind of fitting for this because, she's on the outside, like K-pop stars have like very, appealing appearances, but inside she was like struggling. But yeah, don't compare your insides to someone's outsides. All right, so I'm here. I'm eating some bagels. Yum. Really good bagels. And the next tip is that you are not behind. I think a lot of people, especially when they're young, in their 20s or 30s, they're always worried that they're so behind. There's so much to learn. And while that is 100% true, I think when I was first starting out becoming a software engineer, I remember feeling really overburdened. Like there was just so much to learn. But I myself became a software engineer when I was 28. I did a boot camp when I was 28, right when I got married. And then it's been like, I don't know, like 10 years or so since then. It's crazy. I remember at the time I felt really behind. And especially when I joined like my first company, I remember like everyone around my level were new grads and things like that. And I felt behind. But I'm here to say that especially if you're in your 20s and 30s, you're not behind. You can get started now and just learn so much and just be able to progress. Now, the later tips, we're going to get into kind of the nuts and bolts on how you can leverage some of the current systems and kind of the current landscape so that you can stand out and things like that. But I think it's still very possible right now, if you wanted to get started, to be able to switch careers or get into this like tech industry, even with AI being so dominant. Now, one caveat I will say is that like if you're worried that like AI is going to take your job, AI is going to take over everything and all the jobs. Like if AI can truly get rid of 100% of like engineering jobs or tech workers jobs, then what other job is actually safe? There is actually not that many things, in my opinion, if AI can truly take over everything, that is safe under the sun. So why not do something that will actually help you learn these AI tools? You know, software engineers, in my opinion, are the ones that are the best at these tools because they just inherently understand what's going on under the hood. But yeah, you're not too late. Now, the next tip is probably my favorite tip, and it's that fear is a crowded trade. This term is kind of used quite a bit during like stock trading. You know, Buffett famously said along these lines of, you know, you want to be greedy when others are afraid, and you want to be afraid when others are greedy. And this directly relates to people essentially quitting CS because they're afraid that AI is going to take your jobs, people not getting into tech, people just fearing that all white collar jobs will be replaced and automated away by AI. And honestly, in my opinion, at least with the current architecture, I just don't see this happening. I think AI is like essentially a super genius and also very stupid at the same time. It needs constant guidance. It needs good validations to know when something's right. Like it has no taste in the matter. And while I do believe that a really good engineer who knows what they're doing can 10x or 20x their outputs by using the agentic tools. But a lot of these people who are saying that AI is going to replace everything, they just don't realize that it's not really realistic for non-engineers or people who are not very technical to get very far with the usage of these tools. So in my opinion, I still think CS is extremely valuable to learn and is totally worth it. And I think right now is the best time to actually learn these things and learn it well. Learn the foundations, learn data structures and algorithms, learn system design, and all of these foundational things is going to help you become a better agentic engineer in the future. So yeah, fear is a crowded trade, so avoid that. Don't be afraid and optimize for learning. I'm in one of these Korean exercise machines. I can do like full loops. But the first tip on this new job, this new type of engineer, is for you to own the problem and not the code itself. I just talked about how the code is losing value, but in my opinion, the domain knowledge and all the expert like problem understanding is still going to be extremely valuable. And in my opinion, when code becomes cheap, I think ideas and very high quality ideas, like good ideas, become extremely more valuable. I think previously, historically, we've always been like and resource strapped. That's why like a modern engineering team is like one PM, one designer, and like 12 engineers, for example. And like all the other support roles are really there so that you could select the right ideas to build. Okay, I'm turning here. And you know, famously, like Steve Jobs even said before that it's just as important and maybe even more important to learn what ideas to not pursue as well. So if you want to become irreplaceable or more valued in this type of work, is for you to deep down into a specific domain and start owning that problem space and trying to understand it deeply, like to your root, and not just rely on like, can you do this? Can you generate this code or that code and things like that? So own the problem, not the code. So this next tip is that taste is the moat. I think anyone who has used these AI coding tools or ChatGPT or even Comfy UI for generating images, I think everyone can admit that to translate taste is extremely difficult. There's a reason why it's so obvious when something is AI generated, like whether that is writing, whether that is an AI image. Of course, things are getting better and better, but to me, it's still very obvious when something is fully AI generated. Now, I'm always on the sense that you should be using these tools to elevate your work, but you shouldn't be completely 100% just not thinking and letting these tools do all your work, right? The most human part is the taste. How do you encode your taste so that the machine can understand it? And that's kind of part of agentic engineering, and we're going to get into that. But I personally think that taste is a factor. Like, let's say we're trying to generate videos, like there's zero shot that this combination of things would happen. Like, for example, me coming here and doing this thing, and then talking about AI. I just don't think that is possible. And this is taste, and whether or not this is actually a good idea or not. But personally, I think this kind of things is important. It makes things more genuine. It makes things more human. And for engineers, I think you need to learn how to build your taste. And whether that taste is about coding or like how certain things should look or feel or design, whether that's UX, all of these things you should actively study the greats, study the work that inspires you, and then you have to slowly start building your own taste. And that's where the real moat is going to be. All right, so this next tip is around agentic engineering. And honestly, I think it's one of the most important, a new type of like expertise. Anja Karparthi has often talked about agentic engineering and these kind of like learning how to use these tools effectively as a skill gap. And, you know, Peter Steinberger talked about agentic engineering. He has joked about the past that he does agentic engineering during the day, and around 2 a.m. he just vibe codes. So what goes into agentic engineering? So there's a lot, but at a high level, I think is context engineering, agentic validations, agentic tooling, building tools for the agent, and also like compound engineering. And these are just some of the pillars, I would say, of agentic engineering. I actually teach about it in a course that I do. But at a high level, I think agentic engineering is a very important concept that you need to learn. I think like as the models get better and better, all of the sub work around the meta work of getting the agents to do more for you on your behalf is going to be the real leverage and the real work. And all of the things I talked about of taste being the mode and all these kind of things is going to be very important for like validation loops, right? So like to teach the agent what good is, like you first need to know it, you need to own the problem, right? You need not the code, and you need to like understand the taste and like what makes that validation work, and like how do you encode the taste in so that the agent can recreate some of your decision making. So a lot of that is regarding agentic engineering. I think it's a topic that people should not sleep on. It's one of the most important like subcategory of like new types of work that everyone's gonna need to do. Whether you're an engineer or PM or a designer, you're gonna have to leverage and learn these kind of things to be able to perform at like a new level. All right, so the next tip is around shipping things that last. I think your reputation as someone who can ship things that are long lasting, things that last the time, and like yes, as a high quality bar is going to go an extremely long way, especially in the day of AI. I think because AI coding is like very cheap, people tend to like ship a lot of code and like not double check a bunch of things. I think there's an ongoing kind of conversation going on right now on whether or not like you should review your code. I'm still on the stance that if you're gonna land something to production, you probably should review the code. This may change. AI is getting really good at code reviewing, and sometimes it might be a code smell, but at the end of the day, you are responsible for your own code. So you need to ship things that last. I think Buffett famously said that reputation, like your rep, takes like years and years, like 20 years to gain and like to get to a point where everyone trusts you 100%, but it only takes like 5 minutes to lose face and lose that reputation. I've seen a ton of examples of this where people are just like losing reputation for sending like AI generated emails and like trying to land code that is like garbage and then just blaming AI for it. And I don't think you can blame or should be blaming AI for it. At the end of the day, you own your own thing. So yeah, don't be an idiot. Ship things that last. All right, so this next tip is around following the costs of being wrong. So the concept here is that the more expensive it is to be wrong about your certain tasks, the less likely or the higher the bar the AI automation needs to be, the quality of the AI needs to be for that work to be fully replaced. And that's kind of what you want to focus on. look for problems where the cost of being wrong is high. Then it's less likely in the longer time that you have before the AI fully is able to replicate that work or do that work. So as an engineer, you really need to look out for these kind of problem spaces and type of work where it's not trivial for the AI to do. Like AI is really good at making front end code these days, making landing pages and things like that. That's not what you should be focusing on. You should be focusing on things that is hard for the AI to do. And also, if the AI would get that wrong, it's expensive. And that's why like a lot of like doctors and lawyers and like these kind of like traditional old school things with regulations haven't had deep penetration with AI. I mean, there's remnants of it, but it's not as deep because the cost of getting this decision incorrect is extremely high. So that's like a high level of thinking when you're trying to decide on what kind of domain you want to pick or what kind of problem space you want to look into. You want to see if the cost of getting that answer wrong by the AI is extremely high. Then you should have a lot longer time before the AI is capable of doing your work. So the next tip that I have is a little controversial, but I would say you need to aim to become the top 10% of whatever career, whatever job that you're trying to do. You need to aim to become basically the top 10%. Aim for top 1% if you can. The reason why this is important is because the CEOs and companies of all companies are somewhat disconnected from reality. There's some CEOs like Jensen Huang from NVIDIA who will never fire anyone. He even famously said that he would rather torture you to greatness than fire you. So there's people like him who I really admire, but there's a bunch of other companies not named that just lay people off because of end reasons. And for you to kind of get through all of these turmoils and ups and downs is to just be so good that you're undeniable. You have to be like top 10% or top 1%. Easier said than done, but you should be aiming for that. Like if you're doing well, keep doing well. Don't like take it easy. As unfortunate as it is, the current environment is that you just have to be the top 10% to be as safe as possible from like any layoffs. And even then, that's not guarantee that you're going to survive these kind of like changes in business needs and etc. All right, so the next tip is around learning the layers below, learning the lower layers. Now, the thing about AI coding and these agentic tools is that they're inherently new abstraction layers. They're really like adding additional abstractions. And previously you would have to understand the code, you would have to like understand the architecture. Basically, you would have to understand a ton more than you are currently allowed to understand. AI is really good at exploring the code, giving you the architecture, teaching you the code, being able to be productive without, fully understanding every single line of code. And inherently that is abstractions. Even engineers before have used tons of abstractions, like any framework that you've ever used, like React, Vue, even Kotlin, even like Jetpack Compose and like Android. Those are all just abstraction layers. Even the programming language itself is an abstraction layer. So the issue is with AI and these toolings getting better and better, that abstraction layer is going up and up and up. And one thing about abstractions is that abstractions in itself, like all abstractions, are inherently leaky. And what that means is that sometimes the fundamental foundation layers, the things below the abstraction layers, they may break or degrade or something can go wrong. Now, if you don't know how to go in and debug these layers or even just have a base understanding of what's happening under the hood, then you're going to lose control of your projects. You're going to lose control of the work that you're doing and you're going to get stuck at some point. And this has happened all the time for people who don't understand the foundations of agentic coding or just building things with AI. They always get to production and then they run into issues, whether that's security or whatever. They always run into issues. And this will keep happening if you don't learn about the layers below. Now, I'm not saying here to go and, dig into every single library, every single framework, but you should be curious as like a default stance and dig in where if you don't understand how things work, you should try to understand it and go deeper and deeper and learn those layers. The deeper understanding of the foundational stuff you have, the hard things, the better it's going to be for you. All right, so the next big tip is around actually reading more code. Now, a lot of people are going to tell you that you need to stop reading the code. because the AI is better at reviewing the code and the AI writes too much damn code. So it makes sense logically that you don't want to be the bottleneck. So that just means that you have to read less code and ship more code. But personally, for me, I think learning is actually the bigger and more important thing that you need to do, especially if you're in your 20s or your 30s. If you're trying to build a good foundation, you need to learn a lot of code, a lot of freaking code, in my opinion. Now, even for me, I spend more time, I think, reading code than actually writing and generating code. Of course, I'm like generating a ton of code, but I'm hyper focusing on what I need to read. Now, the important thing here is that you shouldn't read everything. There are important things that you need to read, and there are things that you should be okay with just letting the AI do. Now, how do you decide what you should be reading? Well, number one, you should read the hard stuff. What are the patterns, the system designs that are hard? And you wouldn't normally learn how to do that on your own unless you are like a genius or something. But a good example is like if you want to build like an agentic tool, you should probably know about the React loop, like what does that look like? Essentially at a high level, it's like basically a while loop where step one, the agent reasons, it hits the model, it asks if it should use any tooling based on the user's original input, and then it acts, and then it like cycles through that over and over until the agent finishes. So like that code, that piece of code that makes your application agentic is something that you probably want to learn about. So maybe go read open code, deep dive into that, and then see how that open source code is actually made and how tools should be organized. So all of these things, the hard parts, the things that matter is what you should be reading. And all the little stuff like how to center a div or go, make some random React component. These are like easily verifiable these days with like unit tests or component screenshot tests. And I don't think it's worth that much to read unless you have no idea how those are done. So as you learn more and more about coding and how certain things are built under the hood, the less you need to read that specific code, right? And leverage kind of the meta agentic gardens like tests and validation loops and etc. to get more out of your agentic coding. So in my opinion, you still need to read a ton of code. And I think it's more important to just like read a lot and learn a lot about these foundational things. Anything that you don't just like understand, you should read about it and learn about it and try to build it and use the AI to vet your understanding. So read a lot of code. All right. So the next important tip is on ignoring titles and focusing on shipping. When I first became an engineer, I actually just tried to ship a lot of things. And I remember that really helped me move up very quickly. And I think that is still the same these days, where you just have to focus on building and shipping like real valuable products, and just don't let your title like hold you down. I think that's more important than ever. I think the best ideas will always win. So if you're in this position where you are like new to a company, don't let your position hold you back. Use AI, use all the tools that you have to like really get a leverage and just build your ideas and test it out. All right, this next one is one of my favorites, and it's actually learning where the AI fails. So the thing is, if you use these toolings enough, you'll kind of eventually fall into this zone where you inherently get the second sense of knowing what the AI can do or cannot do. So you start developing the sense of like what these AI systems are really good at and bad at. And I think it's actually a skill in itself to have this like second sense. It's like problem solving in a sense. If someone says, hey, I need to do this kind of automation, what can you do? How can we do this? Then you should inherently just know immediately like, oh, we could probably use this kind of data extraction. We could probably have this kind of context gathering. And then we could have like these kind of AI systems in place that will do the work and automate that work. So that whole workflow is learning what the AI can do and what the AI can fail. And one of the most funny things is, if you think about it, all LLMs can do is really just hallucinate at the end of the day. Everything is just like a guess that the AI model is making. The ones that are useful just happen to be useful hallucinations, right? So get a really good intuition of learning when AI can fail. Like start a log or like just just start keeping track and try really pushing as far as you can with these systems and test where the AI can do something and cannot do something. All right, so the next tip is that you need to have a T-shaped portfolio. Now, I made an entire video about this earlier in the year, but the high level idea is that you need to have essentially a wide depth of knowledge on various things, because this will help you know what is possible with the AI, like what you can physically do and quickly navigate from different projects to projects and learn different like domains really quickly. That's kind of the high level idea, that you want the breadth of knowledge so that you can coordinate and orchestrate multiple agentic tools at a higher level of abstraction. But you also need at least one really deep understanding of something foundational. Like, you're not a specialist per se, but you just need like a deep understanding of at least one tech stack, and that will be like your main work that you do at like work or whatever to be competitive. But then you just need to have this like breadth of knowledge on top of it, so that you should be able to pull from these different sources and different disciplines to perform even better at your current job. So you need to have a T-shaped portfolio. And this kind of portfolio is what recruiters are currently looking for. All right, so the next one is on mastering AI tools. And I think this may be one of the most important tips, I would say. Like, you just have to learn Cloud Code or Codex like the back of your hand. You need to understand how it loads memory, how it manages context. You need to understand like kind of the important slash commands and skills, what a skill is, what an agent is, how to do multiple sub-agents, agent teams, how to like teleport your instances, how to remote control, how to do scheduling, loops. I know I just listed a bunch of stuff and it's maybe like too much. And you may wonder, like, do I really need to know how to do all this stuff? And in my opinion, I think yes, you need to know these things, just like a professional woodworker knows how to use all of their tools efficiently and professionally to be able to make like complex joineries and etc. These agentic tools are the tools of the future, and you need to know it. Now, I would also go as far as other AI tooling, like even video generation, image generation, like which image model is the best and for what specific purpose, which video model is the best and for what purpose, voice models, and how to do like local LLMs using Olama. And there's just so much that you can learn in this new area of tooling and agentic tooling. And in my opinion, if you really want to stand out and be great in this new environment, is to master these tools. Just be able to leverage these tools alone, I think, can get you hired. All right, the next tip is the world's best tutor is an AI. I personally find that I can learn basically anything that I want with AI, whether it's to learn Blender, whether it's to learn Adobe, a new software, or just doing a deep dive in some code base, like looking into open code or learning about TPUs versus GPUs. Whatever it is, I'm using AI constantly to learn. And I think the important thing here is that you develop a desire to want to learn. All right, the next one is pushing it to prod. A little shout out to my newsletter, Get Pushed to Prod, on Substack. But this one is really about pushing through to shipping something all the way to the end. The number one thing that happens with people who start building stuff with AI tools is that you just chase the red dress, meaning there is a bunch of new shiny things, new side projects all the time. So you just do this, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then you end up never shipping anything to production. And in my opinion, you learn the most if you ship something all the way from like 0 to N and shipping it and then maintaining it, and you just don't learn the same lessons. And in my opinion, the people who are very senior, the people who are way at the top, have shipped a ton of things and have the scars to prove it. And because they have the scars to prove it, they're able to handle situations that most engineers who have never shipped anything to production and maintained it for more than a year or 3, they just don't have the depth and knowledge to handle certain situations that will inevitably come up. So push yourself to ship it to prod. All right, so this next tip is around communication is the largest leverage that you will have. In my opinion, being able to properly articulate your ideas is still the killer skill that most people lack. Now, unless you're like Carmack, who's like a genius engineer who can essentially build the next graphics layer that the entire industry adopts, then you're kind of shit out of luck. you got to do what everyone else does. And in my opinion, being an amazing communicator will greatly help you stand out amongst the crowd. And I always say that like doing YouTube for me personally has always started from a place of trying to get better at speaking. And if you ever want to see like someone suck at communicating, look at my first ever video and kind of the evolution of my journey on YouTube. And because I do YouTube prolifically and I treat it as a skill like anything else, and I try to improve on my speaking and the way that I deliver messages and things like that, whenever I have to give a presentation or do anything of that matter, I'm never afraid to do it because I just know that I can perform and execute on this kind of verbal communication skill. And in the age of AI, when there's just so much noise, I think to be able to stand out, these are going to be these soft skills that there really isn't a place for AI to really interject here. Maybe help you script certain things, but like I said, you don't want to sound like an AI. You don't want to sound like you're reading off an AI script, right? That will ruin your reputation, right? So I still believe communication is going to be the single most leveraged skill that you can learn, besides everything else that I mentioned, right? Right. Now, this next tip is around becoming worth vouching for. Now, in a lot of my videos, I've always mentioned that I've optimized for people in a lot of my careers. So what that means realistically is that I found strong leadership and I kind of stuck with them. But at the same time, I worked incredibly hard to earn the trust of my leadership. And I essentially became a person that people would be very happy to vouch for. And I've done this with every manager that I've ever had, starting from my first manager in software engineering. I still chat with him from time to time, but the thing is, the industry is a lot smaller than you think. For example, in Gemini right now, one of the main VPs from Instagram went to Gemini, and a lot of people are going over there to Gemini, as an example. And I'm sure like OpenAI, Anthropic has a bunch of meta people, and people are going there. So the thing is, you need to have good reputation, and these reputations will last a long time. And to get good rep, and to be vouched for is to build it is essentially just all the things that I talked about so far and the rest of the video essentially. But yeah, so you always want to put your best foot forward, and eventually and over time you'll just build this reputation of yourself, and people will know about you, people will want to refer you, and referrals are always the best way to get hired. So the next tip is to do what feels like play. And in my opinion, with all of these tools, sometimes it just feels so magical and it's actually quite fun. And I talk a lot about this in a lot of my Claude Code tutorials, but sometimes when I'm doing a multiple agent orchestrations with multiple panes and I'm just juggling a bunch of Claude Code instances, it kind of feels like StarCraft, like I'm playing StarCraft. And there's a sense of like joy that I get. And I know this kind of experience is probably not enjoyable for everyone, to each their own, I say, right? But try to find what is fun, and you end up finding a lot of enjoyment and satisfaction from doing it. There's this famous quote from Steve Jobs. It kind of goes like this, where he was saying that the people who succeed in life in long term are the people who ended up finding something that they really were passionate about and then stuck with it for a really long time. Because if you are not that passionate about it, or you don't find enjoyment in the thing that you're doing, then when it gets hard or it gets frustrating, you're going to end up quitting. And then the ones that are really crazy about the things that they're doing, they're the ones that stick it through during the hard times and the long times. So find something that is essentially play for you. So this next one is following the money, and it's not actually what you think it is. And the thing is, if you're just starting out, chances are getting into one of these like major AI labs or FANG, it might be a little bit out of reach unless you have like really good internships and things like that. It just is kind of hard to reach. So in this case, you want to just kind of follow the money. The funny thing is, a lot of these AI tools that are heavily being leveraged are being done in a lot of like traditionally boring industries, like finance or farming, or some bespoke place might just be the ones that are leveraging AI the most. So look out for it, look out for those things, and then try to get into it. And that way you can essentially be in a place where the demand for AI is just super high, and there's just not a lot of people that are looking into it. So you're essentially looking for a place that is not crowded. And you could find that by just following the money. Now, the next tip is taking risks before you can't. And I actually did this myself when I was 28. I quit my job and went to a boot camp. At the time, it was kind of a big risk. I didn't have that much money. I wasn't making that much. But yeah, I went and did the boot camp and it paid off quite well. And the thing is, this is very true right now. I feel like doing a startup, optimizing for opportunities for learning, I think these are the risks that you should take especially if you're young, because at some point it'll be harder and harder to take risk. And for me right now, because I have 2 kids and I have a good paying job, the risk of doing something else or quitting my job or pursuing YouTube or doing just something else than what I have going on is huge risk to me financially and also like security for my kids. So if you're young, take risks. And many famous people have said that when you get older, you don't really regret the various failures, but you definitely do regret the risk that you didn't take for certain like new experiences or certain opportunities. So take the risks that you can right now. All right, this next one, you want to optimize for slope and not your salary. Now, when you're first starting out and you're making a change or taking a risk, you want to change the slope of your learning. You want to maximize whatever opportunities that you can have to increase the learning as much as possible. The salary and all that kind of stuff eventually comes down the line, and you'll be surprised that if the slope that you created is steep enough, eventually in a few years, the amount that you'll be making difference will be made up completely. I remember when I was first starting out, I was kind of like comparing between job A and job B, worrying about like 20 grand or whatever. And I was like really torn because I wanted to go to company A, but it was paying like 20 grand, a little bit less, but it had like a better learning opportunity. And I'm so glad I took the learning opportunity because I think that elevated me to go further, faster. And now at my level, $20,000 doesn't seem like anything at all. In fact, my bonuses end of the year is multiple times that amount. So you don't want to optimize for like a little bit more here or there, but you want to really look out for the things that will elevate your learning as fast as possible. All right, so this next one is about owning the ugly work. Now, there is one caveat to this, is that even though the work may be ugly, not desirable, it has to be important. That is one caveat for this tip. But the thing is, especially when you're early and you're starting out, you may often see that like the best, quote unquote, best work and the most shiny work is given to the more senior and the people who are more established. And the thing is, a lot of junior folks tries to figure out a way to work on those projects, which is good. But at the same time, it's crowded. When the work itself is crowded, the large portion of kind of the merit goes to the leads and like the senior folks. So instead of going to a crowded space, if you can, it would be better to own an ugly piece of work. Maybe it's insights, some migration, or some core piece of technology in your organization that is still valuable and very useful and critical. But it happens all the time that there's just things that people end up not owning, even though it is critical to the org. So doing the dirty work, doing kind of thankless work, and then doing it consistently and doing a good job will definitely help you move up quickly if you do it right. Now, there is a caveat that you have to be vocal here, and you have to make sure that it is actually still valuable. Don't get confused of like ugly work that is like also not valuable. Then that's like something that you should definitely avoid. Now, the next tip is for you to become the bridge between your company and the AI products. So these tools, in my opinion, there's a clear skill gap. And right now, most of the people that I've talked to, there are a lot of engineers that I've talked to that are in different levels, like principal engineers, architects, and senior engineers. And, I've talked with a gamut of engineers. And the thing is, almost universally, most people are not sure what is quite possible and not possible with these AI tools, unless you have spent a ton of time investing in Claude Code or Codex. The thing is, I have. And because I've done that, at least in my company, I was lucky enough to be in a position to be able to lead a lot of our like AI transformation work. And that's kind of the key. A lot of companies right now are doing AI native transformations. So what that means is if you are the person who knows the most about these tools and what is possible, what kind of integrations is actually doable and at what scale and how much it's going to cost. And those kind of, if you can answer those questions, then you're going to be in a really good position. Now, if you're just starting out, you might not be the lead of everything, but because all of this stuff is so new, even if you're like a new engineer or like a senior engineer, you might be able to be in a position that is leading these efforts that usually maybe a principal engineer would usually lead. But right now, because all of this is so new, those engineers who's been around, they're just not going to automatically know. They're going to actually have to spend the time and really dig in and get the ground source of truth by just being in Codex or Claude Code for like 10 hours a day for like a decent amount of time. And most like principal engineers, they just don't have the time because, you know, they're in meetings most of the time and a lot of people weren't coding really. So in my opinion, some of like engineers who are just like investing all their time learning these things are going to be in a much better position. So be the bridge between your business and the AI. All right, the next tip is around networking before you need it. In my opinion, networking is an extremely important skill that you should learn, especially if you're early in your career. I often say that opportunities are attached to people, not specifically job boards. And you can see this in action if you ever went through like a referral experience versus just cold applying. Now, in my opinion, the best way to actually network long-term is to just have genuine experiences and work colleagues over time. And that's the best way to build your network. So getting into a really good tech company really helps a long way because in these larger companies, people cycle in and cycle out. And in like a few years of working at like Meta or Google or any of these like major tech companies, you'll one day wake up and your network will be amazing. You'll just be all over the place. But if you don't have that, you need to somehow create that. And in my opinion, there's a lot of ways to kind of build that network without any of that as well. One interesting way to build your network is actually through social media and building content. Now, I make content around tech. Since my time making content, I've found a bunch of content creators that talk about tech, and they are now part of my network. And I try to be as genuine as possible. I'm not just making these contact points just so I could ask a favor or whatever, but it's really just because I'm genuinely interested in these people's work. And if something comes up where there's like an opportunity to work together, that's like just like a cherry on top. So I highly recommend you to build a network before you actually need it, because when you don't actually need it is when it's the easiest and the most genuine for you to build a network. The next tip is on winning the interview. Now, I think interviewing is a skill. It sucks, but it's a skill that you need to learn. Now, one of the things that people often ask me these days is that because of AI, has the interview changed? And I think the answer is essentially yes and no. Fundamentally, the interview landscape is changing and has definitely changed quite a bit, but not so much, honestly. For example, I think lead coding is still valuable. A lot of companies are still a little behind when it comes to this, and I don't think they'll change the way they interview at least for another year or so. Who knows, really? But fundamentally, lead code or these kind of like lead code style questions where maybe they set up an environment and you have to like solve or fix some problems. Those manual coding assignments, I think, are still going to be around because honestly, there hasn't been anything that's like more like kind of a direct way to know whether you know how to code or not. And then system design is still going to be a large portion. If you're starting out, it's probably not as big, but I think it's definitely worth learning system design deeply these days. I think because of AI, I think that level of abstraction is going to be even more and more important. I think it's going to be graded even more heavier. Now, there is a new type of interview that I think it will like evolve and be like created. And one of them I think might be around AI coding on essentially agentic engineering, but not enough companies know about it yet. Like they just don't fully understand the concepts, but I guarantee in like a year or two, knowing how to use these tooling, because it's such a critical part of your job, is going to be part of the interview. I could almost guarantee that. And I think there's some remnants of it already where there's some places that have AI assisted interviews, but everyone's kind of figuring this out. In my way, the best way to still win the interview is honestly, it's still kind of the old traditional lead code, data structure, and the algorithm, system design, behavior interview practice, doing all of those, nailing all of the fundamentals. And then for each company that you are applying, making sure you brush up and try to gain as much information on any new processes that they have. But again, I still think getting into the best tech company that you can is still the best advice I can give you. Either that, join one of the very hot startups that are very well funded and is in the bleeding edge of AI usage. All right, the next tip is around picking the manager and not the logo. I think your manager is probably the most important person that kind of determines how enjoyable your job is and how well you can actually do. A good manager is really kind of a game changer in so many different aspects. They fight for you in rooms that you're not part of, which is like a very important and under like rated thing. You know, all of the performance review cycles and things like that. If your manager is your biggest advocate, and without his or her help, you will not be able to succeed in your organization. A lot of people like understate how important a manager is, and they only think it's just a performance thing. But there's so many things that a manager does behind the scenes that you may not be aware of. You know, they may protect you, they may protect your time, they may guide you and mentor you to pick the best projects and things like that. But one caveat here is that you need to pick the right horse. You need to know how to find good management. And one of the meta tips that I have around this is that you need to look at your manager and then their manager and then their manager and then see how strong that connection is. One easy way is to just ask or figure out how long they've worked together. And then another really good sign is how many very strong ICs want to work with this manager, because all of these signs is that this manager is successful and is a good leader. And in my opinion, having a good manager that you could work with for a long time and getting onto the bench is something what I call that will pay you dividends long and long. And not only in terms of your career growth, but just like your sanity. And having a good manager is worth its weight in gold, in my opinion. All right. The next tip is on finding great mentors. Now, through my careers, I have had many great mentors, and I feel like all of them has saved me many years in my journey to get to where I am today. And I feel like I have mentors for a lot of different things, whether that is like deep dives on performance, like technical mentorship, and there's also mentorships on how to navigate your career, and also like even YouTube. I have like mentors around YouTube. I feel like having great mentors will save you a ton of time. And I think in the age of AI, where learning the taste and learning what good is, I think having a mentor will really help you level up quickly. The thing is, there is a limit to what AI can teach you. It can teach you like general like knowledge and like deep dives and things like that. But when there's too many choices, the AI may glaze you. So you really need a mentor to kind of like guide you and course correct you throughout your journey to becoming an engineer. All right. So the next tip is to teach to learn. So I often say that you don't really know if you actually know something or some topic until you try to teach it to someone else. You really only gain true mastery if you could teach it to like a beginner. Now, of course, not all great engineers are great teachers. You know, not all players in like sports are great teachers. I myself have trained hundreds of engineers, and this is not like arbitrary figure. I've actually trained hundreds of engineers on Cloud Code and Codex. I actually teach a course on the side for fun, but also internally at my company, I've led multiple sessions with like hundreds of people in it, and I taught them agentic engineering, Cloud Code, and just like all of that. And I've led multiple initiatives on this topic. And I think the only reason I was allowed to even be in this position to like teach is because I learned it really deeply, and I like advocated for it very heavily. And I initially just started making videos even internally about the tooling, just teaching everyone everything I knew about these tools. Because of those teaching, I found just more opportunities to teach more people. And because I am teaching more people now, I am spending more time myself deep diving. Whenever a new feature comes out, I want to learn it because I want to teach it. So there's this kind of like cycle and flywheel that happens when you are really into teaching. So yeah, give teaching a try. I think you'll be surprised how much you don't actually know something until you try to teach it. And then your students and people who you teach from will ask you questions that will challenge your understanding. So teach to learn. All right, so the next tip is on picking a direction and sticking with it. When you're first starting out, there's so many distractions. There's so many like red dresses, I like to call them. And you want to go work on this, you want to work on this side project, you want to dive into this thing. And if you start too many things and never finish it, never ship anything to production, then you kind of lose out on progress. You'll end up kind of like mistake motion for progress, and that's like not the best move when you're trying to get something done. So in my opinion, you need to pick one thing, whether that is like learning mobile development or building some agentic tool. Like see it from 0 to n all the way through. Pick one direction and go as deep as you can. And going back to kind of the T-shaped portfolio, this will help you get that depth by building deeply and picking one thing. One of the common things that you see here is, let's say that you're climbing a mountain, and if you climb one mountain, you'll like go to different peaks and valleys, right, of that mountain. And imagine those are like roadblocks or like challenges. And at some point you'll hit one that is hard to do, hard to get past. And because of that, you'll just go to a different mountain and start from the beginning. And you'll feel like you're getting a lot of progress because the initial problems are probably very similar and you've already experienced them before. So you're not really learning, you're not really gaining any momentum. Instead, you're gonna hit that same like peak, something similar, and then you're gonna want to go to another mountain because the new learnings and new challenges are hard, and the gains are like further and further in between. So avoid those things. If you really want to see progress, you need to pick one direction and then go really far. All right, so this next one is about building in public or learning in public. And personally, I think it takes a lot of courage to do anything in public, like even filming this. And because you're going to share things that are maybe not quite ready and you're a little embarrassed by it, it helps you build like tough skin. It also helps you want to like finish something fully so that other people can check it out. There's just so many elements to building in public that I think is good for people that are trying to start out. Now, the other, besides like the self like improvement aspect of it, I think there's also this angle of being able to network very easily, right? You're going to be able to find a lot of people that are interested in your things. And, sometimes you might even just straight up get a job off of it. Or like in cases like OpenClaw, maybe you make like an open source project that goes crazy and everyone knows about it. And now you're one of the staple developers in this new AI ecosystem. So you never know what's going to happen. So in my opinion, like building and sharing in public is an extremely valuable thing, especially early in your career. So yeah, build in public and learn in public. Now, continuing on this topic, I also think you should really take a moment to audit all of your expenses. You'd be surprised how many subscriptions you probably have that you don't need. You really should just focus on the core things that you need to essentially learn what you need to learn, survive, eat and things like that, and save the rest. But just audit every single thing that you spend on, like your audit and code, for example. You'll be genuinely surprised how many things that are probably slipping through the cracks. So just get your house in order and audit your expenses. Now, on the topic of your tiny cage, I would say the next tip is that your first 100K to save is going to be the hardest. There's this kind of saying that your first 100K is extremely difficult, and then your next 1 million is very difficult as well, and then the next 5 million feels impossible. But once you hit these milestones, at some point it becomes a lot easier to make money. To save $100,000 is extremely important because it gives you a lot of safety and wiggle room in the future. And also there's been lots of studies that said that if you have saved $100,000, you're much likely to save $1 million in the future. All right, so this next tip is set it and forget it. I think I would feel bad if I didn't leave some investment advice for, like, especially if you're in your 20s and 30s, but essentially pick an index, put some money in there every month, and just set it and forget it. Like, just do this consistently. Hopefully you have built a small cage and you don't have that much fixing expenses. Just makes this part of your fixed expenses. This is not advice specifically related to AI, but in my opinion, in this day and age, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So saving for a rainy day is like extremely important. So just take advantage of the compounding effects of setting it and forgetting it, and just have it recurring. Like pick some good index like the S&P 500 and then just invest. This is not investment advice though. So I've told you to save a bunch of money and build yourself a tiny cage. And the next tip is around what you should actually spend your money on. And in my opinion, the number one thing you shouldn't skimp on right now is your AI tools. You should pay for your own AI tools if you don't have access to it. The thing is, these tools are not expensive. The max plan for Claude Code or Codex is like $200. And depending on how fast you use it, you could hit the rate limits pretty quickly. But personally, I pay for these. I also get a bunch of tokens at work. But the reason why I kind of encourage people to spend the money on this stuff is because it's learning. As I mentioned in this video, I think these tools are the single most important tools that you need to learn in the next like few years. You just have to be really good. You have to get so good at it that you know how to debug things. You know the layers below, the abstraction layers below on how it works. You know all of the skills, all of the plugins. You know how context is managed. To do that, you need to spend your money where your mouth is, essentially, and really dig into these tools. So don't be stingy here. Don't wait for it. So use these tools to the best of your abilities and use it now before they change like kind of the plan is. You know, this $200 plan with the current usage is not gonna last forever, in my opinion. All right, the next tip is that rest is non-negotiable. It's kind of funny with AI, you would assume that a lot of these things are being done autonomously and like a lot of the work you probably don't need to do anymore. But I've personally find myself working even more. And I think part of it is because there's a lot of people who are like me, who are like builders at heart, who wants to constantly build things. I actually have a video on being addicted to Claude Code. So yeah, I think you really need to get your rest. You don't want to just like keep pushing yourself. I think there are times when you need to push, times when you should rest. But if you don't get a habit of like working out and relaxing and resting, then you're not going to make it very long. It's a marathon and not a sprint at the end. The next tip is on building your escape hatch or multiple income streams. Now, I myself have multiple income streams now. Like work is just one part of it, but YouTube is an income stream. My newsletter is an income stream. The course that I do is an income stream, and I'm always looking for new income streams. Now, this whole like section around saving, watching your costs, not spending that much money, building kind of your wealth. The large reason why I'm talking especially about this, especially if you're in your early 20s and 30s, is because of the uncertainty of the future. A lot of people talk about the K-shaped economy and how there might be a permanent middle class, and the people who have all the tokens are the ones that are gonna essentially have all the money and all the power. And honestly, it's a little scary and it's a little unsettling, right? So to me, I think the best thing you can do is make sure you have a lot of escape hatches, make sure you have a lot of sources of income just in case something happens to one of them. And yeah, so I am not going to stay here and say, hey, I know the future, I know what's going to happen. So the best thing you can do is make sure you have an escape hatch, save your money, and be able to invest it properly so that it just doesn't burn to inflation and things like that, to prepare for something just in case AI does in fact take over everything. Now, the next tip is around your physical health, and it's really like training like your life depends on it. I think you need to work out, you need to be fit. This desk job, I personally found it to be extremely like painful as I'm getting close to my 40s. My wrist hurts, my lower back hurts all the time. I'm tight. And I just wish I like stretched more and like used the standing desk more when I was younger and did like yoga and things like that. So these days I have like working out and health as like a high focus. I keep saying this, but it's a marathon. All of these things is a marathon and it's not a sprint. And if your body's not healthy and it's not in the right state, then you're not going to make it very far. You don't want your body to be a limiting factor on your growth and your success. So the next tip is to be an early adopter. Now, personally for me, I've always been an early adopter. I highly recommend being an early adopter, especially for AI coding tools, and also not just coding tools, but voice models, image models, like the best AI search, like Perplexity, like all these like different things that you can do with AI. I think it's worth being an early adopter because it will let you essentially see trends and be able to live in the future a little bit. Now, the crazy thing about all of this stuff is that like Opus 4.5 is a really good example. When that model came out in November of last year, I remember I just tried it right away because there was also like a double rate experience during the holidays. And I just remember it was like, wow, like something clicked, something changed. And because I adopted to it very early and I switched all of my workflows to it as soon as I found that it was like game changing, I was able to learn a lot more than other people around me faster. And because I was in that position, by the time that the entire industry kind of woke up, and around February, I think that's when like it spiked, end of January and around February, at least for our company, the usage of Claude Code just exploded. And by then I had already been using 4.5 for months. And I've been heavily just optimizing skills, learning all the fundamentals. So when everyone was struggling and learning, I was ready to teach. And what I did was I took all of that experience and started teaching people. And that helped me get into a position where I was able to lead initiatives and lead AI and basically create new scope for myself. And I think you could do this by being early. And in my opinion, especially for these tools, doing some investigation early and chasing some of these tools, I think is very important and it will be very beneficial because it will help you get ahead of the game and ahead of the curve when it comes to these things. Now, a tip on how to be early and how to get informed on all of these things is to follow the leaders in AI. I personally follow a bunch of people like Boris Henry, Andre Karpathy, Peter Steinberger, obviously Dario and Sam, also Elon. I don't care about like politics or anything. I try to keep my ear on the ground and get informed on these things that are kind of coming down the line. And whenever someone says anything like ridiculous, when Jensen says something like, oh, a $500,000 engineer who gets paid that much a salary, if they don't spend $250,000 worth of tokens, then I'll be deeply concerned. So when he says things like that, I really like try to think about it. A lot of people like clown on it. A lot of people like dismiss it, but I think there's some validity to that. It really depends on your perspective of what tokens are. Like if you truly believe tokens are a unit of work. But anyways, I have another video around tokens and loops and things like that. So that's coming out. I have my own like AI news source that I built with Claude Code. So I have like people that I think that are worth listening to, and I just have these things and I consume them. And because I'm also making YouTube videos about AI, I'm always trying to be up to date and trying the latest and greatest things. It's a lot of work, but at the end of the day, I think right now is a very special time where these things, the cycles of innovations and the competition is so fierce that I think if you are not actively pushing yourself to be on top of these things, you're gonna kind of fall behind. And there's nothing too wrong with it, but I think if you want to be early, if you want to adopt early, and you want to kind of look to the future a little bit, you kind of have to be in the know, and especially what kind of things the leaders in the spaces are like really thinking about what's in their headspace, because that'll give you some signs and clues to where things may be going in the future. So if you are able to do all of these things and you're essentially financially free, you can make a lot of decisions. I would highly recommend you to bet on yourself, whether that is, quitting a job and like switching careers, for example. That's like what I did. I bet on myself that I could learn like software engineering and somehow ended up from like a PM to become a staff software engineer at Meta. It was a long journey, but I essentially bet on myself every step of the way. So whether that is going for that big job or starting your own thing, I think at the end of the day, this is a great time to really bet on yourself to essentially leverage these tools, especially when a lot of people are kind of sleeping on it. They're not really learning how to use these things efficiently. If you can get ahead and really become an expert in these things, you will get really far, whether that is in your tech career or like doing your own thing. All right. So the next tip is around shipping it while you're slightly embarrassed. So the thing about shipping products, especially when you're working on a side project or something, you want to build it to a point where like the MVP is obviously built. So the term MVP, I don't really like. I think a product being minimal viable is like not really ready, in my opinion. Like you need to go a little bit above that, something that you feel pretty good about, and it like covers a lot of the edge cases and things like that. But shipping something when you're slightly embarrassed with it, especially the V1, I think is extremely important. Like if you're not embarrassed by that first version that you're shipping, in my opinion, that means that you probably waited a little too long before you shipped it. There's a balance of speed and execution that you need to really think about. And if you don't get in the habit of like putting yourself out there and shipping things where you're slightly embarrassed about it, then you'll never ship anything. I've met a lot of perfectionists in my life that like always talk about shipping things but never end up shipping anything, because it just comes with the territory. If you worry about all of the little details like too much, especially for a V1, then you're never really gonna ship. And also once you ship something, you're going to get a ton of feedback and new ideas and things and ways to improve your product that you never would have like understood. So ship things that you're a little bit embarrassed about, especially version 1. All right. So the next big tip that I have is that luck, in my opinion, is when preparation meets opportunity. This is one of my favorite sayings. I don't know where I picked it up. It was probably from a movie called Serendipity, maybe. I'm not sure. But the high level idea is that you go through life where there's just a bunch of opportunities everywhere. And if you're not ready, if you haven't been like training, preparing, learning, building, if you're not sufficiently prepared enough, then you may not be able to seize an opportunity. You may have experiences from time to time where maybe you went to like some meetup or some event, or maybe you got an interview and you just couldn't nail the interview, or you had nothing to offer to someone when you had some luck to meet some people. And that's why I feel like in this day where AI is like so booming, there's going to be a ton of opportunities. I think it's just like everywhere. There's going to be opportunities everywhere. It's easy to raise funding. I think it's easy to land interviews with a bunch of new startups and stuff like that. But if you're not ready and prepared for it, then you won't be able to take advantage of it. All right. The next tip is that your first job is not your final job. A job is just a job at the end of the day. Like if you lose it, or if you take a first job that is not like perfectly ideal, it's not the end of the world. You'll have many jobs in your career, and you should just take the best job that you can when you start out, and then just keep going, and then do the best that you can. And if a new opportunity comes up, you just seize it. A lot of people, especially when they're young, feel like that first job is super important, and I'm here to tell you that it actually is like not that important. Sometimes you could start in like a totally different industry and then switch to another industry, but the important thing is that you keep moving forward and making sure that you're not just complacent in one job and one role. You need to be constantly evolving and growing. So just remember that your job is not like your final job. Okay, this next tip is around if you're building agentic applications. I think one of the best advices that I heard is essentially to build for a model that is available in the future. So right now, I think every generation of a new model release, something that was previously not possible becomes possible. When Opus 4.5 came out, I think that was like a moment where coding with AI wasn't really that great, but that model just made it amazing. So like there was a spike, and it was like kind of a combination of Claude Code's maturity and also Opus 4.5 coming out. I think that kind of made a big difference. I was at a talk with Boris, and this advice of building for the models of the future is one of the best advice that I heard from him. And that's essentially what Claude Code was. He mentioned that when he was working on it, he made it so in an assumption that future model cycles are going to get better and better. So he was able to build features with the assumption that eventually the models will catch up. And I think this is unique for people who are interested in building agentic applications, because if you are just building things for the current level of the models, then it's a lot easier to copy those models, right? And this kind of limits your thinking to what you think is currently possible. But yeah, so if you're building agentic applications, I think building for the future models is a great advice to take. All right, this next tip is around not letting AI atrophy your skills. I think one of the common things that will happen when you get really deep into all of this AI coding and AI tooling and leveraging all of these tools is that you just stop coding manually. Now, I don't really think manually coding is like that important anymore, but you should be constantly studying like system design. You should be constantly studying the core foundational things, like not forgetting about space-time complexity, not stopping to read code, because all of these things, if you don't use it, it's gonna atrophy and it will happen a lot faster than you think. And as unfortunate as I think it is, at least right now, the industry is still in a position where you will need to do lead coding and kind of like manually coding, probably for some interviews. This may change in like a year. This device might be totally outdated by then. But yeah, like watch out for your skills atrophying and making sure that you're like putting in cycles of extra study and continual education. Like I myself personally have dedicated time where I'm deep diving into various system designs like every day. Having deep understanding of how a lot of systems work and a large breadth of it is going to be really important. And also it's really interesting right now because a lot of new patterns are being created because building agentic apps is like a whole new thing. And I don't know, there's just like a lot of interesting things that are going to come out, like agentic voice design and other like interesting experiences that needs to be built on top of this, like model routing. And I don't know, I personally just find they're very interesting. So don't let your skills atrophy and continue to pursue greatness. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed that video. I know it was a long video. 50 tips was no joke to film. It took me quite a while actually. I had hoped to finish it a lot earlier. I think at the end of the day, do not despair. I know it may look like doom and gloom sometimes, and especially when you're young and starting out, it feels like nothing is working out and it might feel impossible. But I will tell you that there is light at the end of the tunnel for those who work hard and push through this. And then I hope you guys make it. I hope you guys find success and truly am able to thrive in this new environment. With that said, I'm gonna enjoy the rest of my time in Korea in my vacation. Sorry for the delays in videos these days, but yeah, I'm on vacation. So I have a bunch of AI coding videos and other things on this channel, so feel free to check it out. And until I see you guys on the next one, bye.